In a small Georgia town, almost 200 miles south of Atlanta, there exists 651 acres of publicly owned land, the Doe Run Wildlife Management Area. Established as a heritage preserve in 1996, this site protects rare flora native to Georgia's coastal plains. Longleaf pines cover the area, with branches reaching up to brush against the sunny sky. However, if you turn away from the pine's lofty splendor, instead crouching along the forest floor and searching among the leaf litter and tall grasses, you can find something incredible. At the site's entrance, a single podium rests with an embossed bronze plaque, which tells the story of this magical place and the strange plants that live here. This trail is dedicated to Anne Lee Barber, whose love of this land and the flowers that grow here was instrumental in the creation of this nature preserve. Not trained as a botanist, she taught herself about the ecology of this special place and the flowers it produces. Using pitcher plants and their neighbors as the centerpiece, she wrote articles, created slideshows, and helped with educational units for teaching environmental awareness. Her vision was to manage this site, to nurture the stands of pitcher plants, and to see it enjoyed by all who seek natural beauty and an appreciation and understanding of the longleaf pine wiregrass plant community. Between the rapidly expanding cities and acres of farmland in Georgia, there dwell other habitats rarely explored and appreciated. Pitcher plant bogs, such as the Doe Run pitcher plant bog, live in isolated patches throughout the Peach State, some only surviving by the kindness of local landowners. These bog sites are not for the faint of heart to find, but those brave enough to put on their boots and leave the paved trails will find the wonder of Georgia's own carnivorous plants, pitcher plants, waiting for them. The genus Sarracenia, known as the North American pitcher plant, includes several incredible species adapted to nutrient-deprived environments across the United States. They have found their own niche, using special adaptations to capture and digest animal matter. They can consume anything, from ants to beetles, bees, and butterflies, if their pitchers are large enough.
A pitcher plant is a very, very fun plant. And it is a plant that is carnivorous, meaning that it literally eats or consumes meat in live animals. Now, it's not eating hamburgers or pizza or hot dogs. Mostly carnivorous plants in North America eat insects, and they're opportunistic. They wait for their prey to visit them. My name's Lisa Cruz. I'm a botanist, and I work with the state government. I work with Georgia Department of Natural Resources. They are not active hunters, but they have design of their features so they very specifically attract insects and bring them into traps where they die and then are digested by chemicals or enzymes that the plants create. So the plants literally are actively digesting the insects. And pitcher plants are distinctive among other carnivorous plants because they have leaves that are folded into tubes, and it's those tubes that are the insect traps. And they're called pitcher plants because those tubes are a bit like a pitcher that you might pour water or tea or lemonade from, and so that's why they get their name.
Utilizing these unique trap adaptations are approximately 7 different species of Sarracenia in Georgia. In the coastal plains region, you can find the greatest diversity of pitcher plant populations in locations such as the Doe Run pitcher plant bog and the Okefenokee swamp near the Georgia-Florida border. Amid the pine forests, even in ditches alongside of the road, many of these elusive plants are scattered across the southern half of the state. Frequently, you can find the stout green pitchers with white spotted backs protruding from neighboring shrubs, the pitchers of the hooded pitcher plant, Sarracenia minor. The tall, sometimes 1 meter high, wide-mouthed pitchers of the yellow pitcher plant, Sarracenia flava. The small red beaks of the ground-hugging parrot pitcher plant, Sarracenia psittacina. Yet one of the most popular, most thoroughly researched pitcher plants does not exist in the coastal plains. Far to the north, in the southern Blue Ridge region, one of Georgia's most endangered species of pitcher plant, a more ancient species, resides, the mountain purple pitcher plant, Sarracenia purpurea.
To be honest, this site is a little richer than a classic bog site. This is old alluvial beaver swamp that's filled in, and we're making use of it because it's on protected land and it's close to the, it's fairly close to a road, so we can get to it and manage it. But this soil is more of a mineral soil and probably a richer soil than what you normally have at some of the really classic bog sites that have a lot of peat. So it's not too rich for it to survive, but it may be too rich for it to really recruit well. I don't know. But the fact that we have it here and that it's growing and doing well, it's doing 2 things. It's making seed. So if this is a site we come out and collect seed for to take it back to a greenhouse, it's a seed producer. And because it's here and it's living, it's a hedge against extinction. The greenhouse burned down, this is here.
I'm Mincy Moffett. I am a wildlife biologist with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife Resources Division, Non-Game Conservation Section. We basically just call it non-game. DNR is non-game. My specialty is botany. I'm a botanist by training, and I work with rare plants, rare plant habitats, rare plant species, restoration of rare plant habitats, reintroduction of rare plant species. That's my primary focus.
One of the things that characterizes these mountain bogs or mountain fens, there's some debate over what we actually ought to call these things, but one of the things that characterizes them is this sphagnum moss, and this is a moss that can hold up to 20 times its weight in water. It's very, very spongy. It's very cool. When it decomposes, it can make deep deposits, which people have actually mined around the world as peat moss, and peat for actually burning in their fireplaces. The bog is a cool place. It's a damp place. And the conditions that are here are sort of antiseptic, and they tend to retard decomposition. You might have a foot of peat soil on top of this swamp bog native soil, and then you could have another foot, 6 to 12 inches of this stuff growing on top. So that's really what we look for when we look for a mountain bog. We want to see this sphagnum moss, and when we look for a place to outplant, that's specifically what we're looking for, is a nice, what we call sphagnaceous area.
At one point there were many more wetlands. In the mountains there were wetlands all throughout the valleys, and the continuous creation and existence and dilapidation of beaver swamps and other habitats before humans came in and drained and developed all the valleys, right? So now they're more restricted to isolated and remote areas where they once were all in between. So like they've shown with the bog turtles that there are metapopulations and they can move around between different wetlands, and at one time the plants would have done so too. That's that's just more restricted now because the habitats are so fragmented. So then those species are fragmented and just isolated in those what habitats are relics of something bigger that existed across the landscape. I'm Carrie Radcliffe, and I am the Mountain Bog Restoration and Safeguarding Coordinator with Atlanta Botanical Garden and Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance. By pouring some more muck and building a little dam out of logs. I was going to put it in that hole. And it'll be good to go. Purple mountain pitcher plant was previously restricted to one wild population that was protected existing on the national forest, but because of threats from wild hogs and poachers, we wanted to replicate that population in multiple sites so that we didn't have all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. So now we have roughly 10 safeguarding sites where we're safeguarding swamp pink and or purple mountain pitcher plant and a suite of other rare species, including orchids and southern Appalachian bog endemics. And we work cooperatively to maintain those populations and to assess our site management goals and accomplishments to keep the sites open and report on the success that we're having from our different safeguarding programs.
Distant from roads, located in deep woods, with thickets of thorns and mud that can easily steal a shoe or two, these pristine sphagnous areas seem untouched by the outside world. However, this has not always been the case. Mountain bogs are safeguarded, maintained in secret locations, and regularly monitored for any animal activity. We like to imagine ourselves as more caring and considerate than other species, but not all humans come to mountain bogs with the intention of preserving the habitat. Unfortunately, humans are one of the animal culprits for bog habitat damage.
Pitcher plants fall into that category. If you've ever seen pitcher plants when they're not brown, when the pitchers are up and when the really, really pretty flowers are up, it qualifies as a sexy plant. Pitcher plants, along with things like orchids and showy azaleas and lilies, those are the types of things that collectors go nuts about. And even though in many cases they could go online or could contact somebody and buy them, there's a thrill associated with owning a poached plant. I can't actually explain it. There's also there's also the situation where something that has been taken from the wild may represent a different ecotype than what is available in cultivation. So somebody might like something that is a first generation taken from the wild pitcher plant than they would something that's been in cultivation for 10 years and has sort of been selected for in the greenhouse. It's a sort of mentality that I don't understand, but it has to do with collection and acquisition, and there are just some people that's really, really important. You know, why would somebody pay millions of dollars to own stolen artwork? Because there's a thrill in it, you know. So poaching is a big deal, and it's one of the reasons we keep our mountain bog locations secret.
So, white top pitcher plant's one of our most favorites. It's the only species that puts up a new suite of pitchers in the fall, and ecologists that we work with told me that part of this is an adaptation for moonlight reflecting off the white tops to catch moths in the fall, which I think is brilliant. All these clever adaptations. So it's one of, you know, with the evening light coming through this, it's a beautiful species, and it's one that collectors have been after. Georgia had one last population in 1987, 1988, and botanists went by and checked it. Everything was fine. 2 weeks later, they went by, and all the story I was told is all the plants were dug up, poached from the wild. I'm Jennifer Seska, and I'm the conservation coordinator here at the State Botanical Garden of Georgia. We are part of the University of Georgia in Athens, and I'm also the coordinator for the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance. So the Atlanta Botanical Garden, who has since become the lead internationally for carnivorous plant conservation, they didn't have Georgia-sourced Leucophylla in safeguarding. So that whole genetic resource, Georgia species, Georgia genetics, those were gone. We could only guess who the poachers were. I don't think anybody really knows. So, flash forward to, so that was about 87, 88, flash forward to 97, 98, and Carol Denhoff, my colleague who was at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, she's now with Longleaf Alliance, she gets a phone call from this fella who is working, a contractor for Georgia Power, I believe it was, and he's hiking down a right-of-way, and he sees this crazy plant. And he calls her and describes it, and she got in the car and drove directly to where he was and confirmed it, and it was no kidding, Georgia white tops. A new population, and we think that once the habitat was opened, like with strategic mowing, that seeds that had survived in the seed bank came up. The Atlanta Botanical Garden noticed one day that someone had jumped someone jumped the fence and stole some of their white top. And they have white tops from Mississippi, they have white tops from Alabama, but somebody took only some Georgia Lucas. So it was somebody who really wanted white top of the Georgia source.
My name is Timothy Putsky. I'm a conservation horticulturist with the Atlanta Botanical Garden. I manage this safeguarding nursery, which is I think 2 or 3 acres of, like I said, mostly accession material of southeastern threatened and endangered plants. Some are just rare, some aren't even rare, but we have just over 150 raised beds now, and we have, I think it's 3,500 square foot bog that we just built last summer with a pond that we're gonna put some salamanders in. There's some frogs that are recruited there. A big project we also do in addition to the Sarracenia is the Torreya taxifolia, which is all of this under the lath house, which is only known from a small part of North Florida, of the Panhandle in South Georgia, and it's declining. The common name is gopherwood. So we're growing all of these plants here for conservation. None of the plants are for sale, and this is a safeguarding nursery. So the plants that are grown here are either extirpated or threatened in their natural habitats, and so a lot of the plants that we're growing here we'll collect seed from in order to reintroduce plants into the wild, or as a last buffer against their extirpation, to preserve their genetic information and have them represented.
If you want to grow pitcher plants, they are not too hard to grow in pots, and we strongly recommend experimenting with them because you can see them at all seasons of the year and how beautiful they are. At the same time, it's very, very important to find a source for pitcher plants that has gotten them ethically, has grown them in a greenhouse from seed that was not taken from the wild, because all the wild populations are protected legally, so it's against the law to take plants from the wild, but it also really hurts the populations. So it's easy to find sources of ethically produced pitcher plants.
Grown here at the State Botanical Garden. My colleague Heather Alley is our conservation horticulturist, and she grows them from seed. And the technique was again developed by Ron Dieterman at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. And it's really easy to grow pitcher plants from seed, and we teach kids how to do it. And the viability of the seeds is usually really high, and you usually get good, like 80% germination. But we sell them every year at our fall plant sale. It's called Connect to Protect, and it's the first 2 weeks of October. And all the money goes to conservation, goes to our operating budget. And we teach people how to care for them in pots, or you can build a little pitcher plant bog in your garden. And they're adorable when they germinate because they form the little baby pitchers right away. And if you had, say, fruit flies in your kitchen, they would eat little baby fruit flies, like if you put a banana next to it. We have told people don't force feed them like raw hamburgers. That doesn't do so well. But they're so much fun. In fact, people used to keep these in their kitchen windows and call them fly catchers to catch the kitchen flies. And that was something that just Georgians knew, and we've become unconnected from that. But this is a way for people to reconnect. They're great plants. They're great storytelling plants. They're long-lived. Pitcher plants can be 150 plus years old. They triple in size when you repot them, so they'll stay small if you keep them in a small pot. Something this size could actually be 2 or 3 years old. It's got so many pictures. And there's a little baby leuco, Sarracenia leucophila, and these are little bitty yellows or flavas, Sarracenia flava. And then we get hybrids. Because if you're collecting from seeds and they've been open pollinated, you're going to get all kinds of crazy things. So sometimes we get some oddities, but those are also lots of fun and also great for storytelling. But these are a big hit, and we're real proud to provide an ethical source because these plants are still poached in the wild and they still face that pressure. And a lot of our sites, we still have to keep the names of those locations private because of poaching.
Probably a bigger threat, certainly a threat that's emerged this year that's been the worst that we've experienced in the past 20 years has been from feral hogs. And feral hogs are capable, even a few of them in a couple of hours are capable of destroying years of work. They don't tend to eat the pitcher plants necessarily or eat the other rare plants, but what they do is they unearth them. Generally, when we find an area that has experienced hog damage, what we see is just a bunch of pitcher plants that are turned upside down that have dried out. Hopefully the corms haven't dried out, but I would say half of the time, half of the corms have dried out. So we lose a lot of pitcher plants that way. Because a lot of these sites are in remote locations and we simply can't get there every day, every week, even every month. I mean, we might only get to one site twice or 3 times a year, and we go and something happened 2 months ago. Well, it's a done deal at that point.
I think also the alternating drought and wet conditions is having more of an intense effect on these sites. The feral hogs have certainly been out really early this year. They typically wallow in wet areas in the heat of the summer, but this year we've seen damage as early as February and March when it's not even hot out yet because they're simply, they're thirsty and they're starved, and it's been so dry that they are looking for places with moisture and with food, and they will come in and they'll dig up the plants and they'll eat some of the plants sometimes. So we've seen a lot of damage this year, more than ever before. So we're dealing with having to try to put down exposures to keep the hogs out, as well as cooperative efforts with Georgia DNR to actually trap hogs. Putting trail cameras out, baiting the sites, and trying to get hog activity on trail cameras so that we can get an idea of how many hogs are in the area and how frequently they are there, so that we can deploy traps or even send hunters out. I mean, unfortunately, some native animals often have an impact too, but not anything like an invasive hog, which is a feral animal that was brought over by early settlers, and they hide out in the mountains and they come out when you least expect it and destroy your fragile habitats and the plants that are in them. So that's really the toughest thing we've been dealing with lately, is the hog damage.
So if you look at the spread of feral hogs, especially over the last 20 or 40 years, they've probably quadrupled. Texas has a huge problem, but we have a huge problem in Florida, southern Georgia, all of the coastal plain, the big rivers in the coastal plain, that's where they really hit. They're not as bad in the mountains, but the thing about the mountains is there isn't that much to eat in the mountains relative to the coastal plain. So it doesn't take a zillion hogs. It only takes a few hogs because there's only a few places that have the kind of habitat they like. They get funneled in there and then they just root them up and destroy them. And that's what happens with our mountain bogs. A herd, a big extended family of pigs is known as a sounder. And some of these sounders are 20, 30, 40 pigs large, and they may even be larger in the coastal plain. I'm talking about the ones I'm familiar with in North Georgia, and the game people that trap them tell me that, they're 25, 30 animals plus, and they can do a lot of damage.
So, to help with conservation of pitcher plants and their habitats, one of the first things I recommend is to get outside and learn as much as you can about them. For example, if you want to visit a pitcher plant bog, one of the ones that's open to the public is Doe Run Pitcher Plant Bog. It's near Moultrie, Georgia, and there's a trail where you can walk through a pitcher plant bog and see this amazing habitat for yourself. Once you've spent some time with pitcher plants, it's so easy to share your enthusiasm for them because they're such amazing organisms. And you can find groups that have volunteer opportunities to work in pitcher plant bogs and help improve the habitat, or simply work in improving habitats for plants in your own neighborhood. For example, I live near Atlanta. So in Atlanta, there's the Mount Arabia Heritage Preserve. They probably have volunteer events. The Chattahoochee Nature Center has volunteer events. Just get outside and find ways to protect plant communities in your own neighborhood, because there's a lot of special plant communities in Georgia. If you wanted to donate financially, all environmental organizations are always needing assistance, and the ones I mentioned that help with specifically with pitcher plant bogs, such as the Nature Conservancy, the Chattahoochee Nature Center is another one.
The non-game section in Georgia is almost fully supported by donations. And there are a number of ways that we get those donations: tax check off and our license plates, and we have a big fundraiser every year. But in general, with the exception of just a few dollars from the legislature, we raise our own money as match for federal funds. So we desperately need funds to be able to go about our business. And we work on the 95+% of species that people don't hunt or fish for, because that's most of the species out there. Game species are a very, very, very tiny percentage of the overall biodiversity that's out there. And I'm just including sort of traditional animals. I mean, once you start talking about plants, Lord have mercy if you throw in lichens and insects and other kinds of animals that aren't hunted. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's millions of species. So we're concerned about those. So we definitely need the funding.
The Department of Natural Resources, surprisingly, we are a state government institution, but we don't get any state tax funding. So we rely on donations as well, similar to a nonprofit, for our biologist salaries and our equipment and our field work. So to give to Department of Natural Resources, one way is you can show off a new license plate. These plates are a very important source of our funds, and they are only $25 more than a regular plate. You can get them at your tag office.
But in addition to somebody maybe supporting a conservation activity, if they're interested about plants, this is the best thing that they can do, in my opinion. There is a group, it's a group that's supported by a series of classes and by a series of training exercises called the Botanical Guardians. And they are a volunteer workforce that is supervised and run out of the State Botanical Garden of Georgia at the University of Georgia in Athens. And they essentially are a group of plant conservation foot soldiers that have been trained so that they understand secrecy, they understand rare plant biology, they understand something about conservation horticulture, they understand about the nature of the restoration work that we do, and they are essentially on call. And so when we do some of our many work days during the year, and we simply need people that know how to do what we do and that aren't going to step on the plant, aren't going to cut the wrong thing, aren't going to talk about it, know how to be gentle and finesse when that's required, or know how to be, muscle up on something when that's required. So it's not just a general sort of uneducated field worker. They're indispensable.
You can give to local botanical gardens that are doing conservation work. You can give to the Nature Conservancy, the Chattahoochee Nature Center. And if you go to our State Botanical Garden website, you can see a list of all the partners. You could send a donation to the State Botanical Garden earmarked for the Georgia Plant Conservation, and it will only go to plant conservation work for the whole network. You could sponsor student research. Students are one of our best ways to get work done because they dedicate 2-4 years of their lives just to a specific project that we need and just to a rare plant of Georgia. And you can also help by donating your time. We are always looking for good volunteers to check plants in the wild, make sure everything's okay, help us look for seeds that are ripening, and then with permission and all the permits that we need, we collect the seeds and do restoration recovery work. Those volunteers are called botanical guardians. They're sworn to secrecy to not tell the location of the rare plant because so many of them are poached. Or you can sponsor a species. If you're really excited and have the means, you could donate to a project specifically to a species and its recovery, and those monies would go to action on the land and growing of plants for recovery.
While Sarracenia have developed ingenious tactics for survival, living in part on the prey they catch, they are ultimately made of the same stuff as all other plants. They can be crushed, ripped apart, torn out of the ground. While they seem like feats of nature, in reality they are delicate creations. Without our help, the habitats that support these incredible plants in Georgia will not survive. That is why it's not just Georgia's pitcher plants that are precious to the state. It's the people, the collective effort of those that care about Georgia's plant communities. Without the hard work of these individuals, many of these sites would no longer exist to inspire awe and wonder.
The sites that are left now, you can imagine acres and acres of pitcher plants across an entire landscape or across an entire stream drain. It's just a beautiful sight when you can see a site like that. And so that's why these places are so important to protect, so people can know what they're like and we can protect the diversity of plants in those sites.
Thank you.